Hello everyone and welcome back. So we finally can talk about the DLC lords, and naturally I'm going to make a video on DECHALA, the Denied One, a character that I really like in the lore. She's very unique as a chaos follower because obviously she's a former elf. So let's talk about her faction effects. Has access to Tormentor's tributes, granting special abilities, auxiliaries and other powerful benefits in return for decadence earned by pleasure palaces. Those are your main settlements. Can corrupt enemy units before battles, weakening them to be easier prey. This is replacing the system of seduction. Character gain experience plus 10% for all characters. Physical resistance plus 10% for all devoted marauders, marauder horsemen, and hellstrider units, which I very much like. Upkeep reduction minus 15% for all devoted marauders for all armies. You're going to be focusing a lot on marauders, and that's perfectly fine, because you can make them pretty damn scary. And then Lord effects. This character can equip one additional weapon item. Yeah, you can have multiple weapons. It's really, well, it makes sense, you know, she's got multiple arms. DECHALA steals 10% of experience earned by other lords, so having other lords is kind of expected, just to make her cap out on experience very quickly. Post-battle chance of demanding a magic item in tribute, as is your due, plus 50%. And finally, weapon strength plus 10% for all non-demonic units in Lord's army. So she's going to be much more viable with marauder units. You can also buff up the warriors, but really you're going to be mostly focusing around the marauders. The start position is kind of odd. It's in the Cathayan hinterlands. Obviously, they've done a story to kind of tie everything up together. It's not bad, and in all honesty, you do fight with quite a lot of enemies. The problem is that you will be fighting with a lot of named characters from the very beginning. Balthazar Gelt is pretty much one of your first hurdles, and he is an incredibly strong character. Obviously, you do have some magical resistance and obviously the physical resistance, but you will feel it if you're not prepared, and if you allow Balthazar to get too strong, you're going to be dealing with that in a pretty difficult way. Also, keep in mind, right next to Balthazar is Zhao Ming, so it's going to be pushing you directly to the Cathayan dragons in most cases. Nakai the Wanderer is also quite close to you, literally right next to you, but he does move up kind of forward. Your potential allies aren't too many. Lokia can be a potential one, yet yeah, it depends if he survives or not. Her skill line is mostly going to focus on herself, but also marauders, making them much more powerful. Really, you're going to have your marauder army stack on her, and it's perfectly fine. Like, you can buff them up tremendously, giving them immune to contact effects, extra melee attack, melee defense. It's really weird going into late campaign, I'm not going to lie, with a marauder stack. Even more so, you can make them stronger and stronger if you have the legendary hero, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, it's odd. It's not a bad thing. It's just very different. Normally, I like to push to get up to Chosen as fast as possible. But this does mean that you can keep with relatively cheap armies without worrying about them not being viable as time progresses. And as stated, DECHALA can have two items, which means that if you can get two really tasty fighting weapons, you can, yeah, mix and match them. It's actually really fun. She does become like an absolute terror. I haven't been able to pick up, like, say, for example, the Sword of Cain and so on, mostly because it's so far away. But yeah, you can get some pretty good items there. But now we have to get into the nitty-gritty, because this is a very different campaign. The gameplay loop is going to be very different because of your settlements. You don't have one type of settlement. Instead, DECHALA, the Denied One, is going to focus very similar to that of the Chaos Dwarfs, where you have three different types of settlements. You have the Tormentor's Hold, which is going to focus around your military or basic infrastructure too. You've got the Thrall Camp, which is going to be a temporary settlement. Yes, you'll be replacing that as time goes on. And then the Pleasure Palace. So this is going to be the most structured SLAANESH campaign, and perhaps the most structured demon campaign that you're going to have, purely because there is a lot more campaign aspect stuff to do. And I think that's a really good thing, especially for a character like this. So we're going to have to talk about each of the ones individually. The first we're going to talk about is the Tormentor's Hold. So these are your standard basic military, a little bit of infrastructure. They will also boost up your pleasure palaces. I like them. The only problem I have here is that you don't have access to heroes very early on. With most heroes requiring other resources, it takes a while to get them up and running, barring the cultist. But the very basic settlement here will at least get you access to Chaos Warriors if you want them, Chaos Spawn, Exalted Demonettes, Slangors, and most importantly Hellstriders. So your basic buildings will get you the basic army that you'll be running quite a lot. Whereas your thrall camps will focus around resource, and that being specifically thralls. Thralls will be used in so many things in this campaign. It might seem daunting, but it's actually not. It's perfectly fine. These are smaller settlements you'll be building up to get like infrastructure, mostly focusing around the thralls, getting them into your general global pool, but also being able to get quite vast amounts of cash. You're going to want to be building these up, and these are going to be some of your main settlements from the very beginning. As you build more and more thrall camps, that resource is going to start pooling a lot more and getting you a lot more benefits, like getting armies up and running quicker, because you are going to need pleasure palaces, and the pleasure palaces are supported directly by the thralls. Don't be surprised if this becomes your main form of settlement, even in provincial capitals, until your normal generation starts outweighing the cost of needing them. The great thing is some of these can end up being quite very good thrall camps, because you can get it with 2,000 thralls and sometimes even more. Now, this is all tied up to the thrall resource, which, as you can see, you get from battles, you get from building construction refunds, you get it from vassals, you get it from other things like quests and so on, ports, technology, cults, gifts of SLAANESH. Unholy manifestations aren't there anymore. This has now been removed, as unholy manifestations didn't fit with DECHALA, as she is a mortal, and it's to keep in parity with Arbal and Tamokon, and finally transferring, because you can transfer them. Lastly, you are spending them on building construction, demonic attraction, other, so like some quest events and so on, ports, cults, and finally gifts of SLAANESH. There are so many things that you are going to be using them for. So from my experience, thralls are a very slow grow at the very beginning, but as you start progressing further and further, the rate of how many thralls you'll start getting does actually increase quite tremendously, and you will start to snowball. Very much like how it goes with the Chaos Dwarves, actually. As stated, once you're done with the thrall camps, you can transform them. So you can either abandon them, turn them into Tormentor's Hold, and something that's not here, which is very weird, is turn them into pleasure palaces. The UI doesn't say it here, but it does actually say it when you are clicking on those specific settlements. Pleasure palaces can only be built on provincial capitals, by the way. What is pretty interesting about this is, like, yeah, you can transform them, so you don't have to abandon them. The problem there is that they do go back down, and you have to, like, rebuild them up. So it's slightly tedious, but, I mean, it's not a deal breaker anyway. It also does take a turn, so, yeah, you're not going to be getting that very, very quickly and expecting them just to transform. Remember that, yeah, your pleasure palaces will cost a bunch of thralls too. And speaking of which, we should actually talk about the pleasure palaces, because there is a lot to talk about. So pleasure palaces are your big building, and you can only build one at a time until you get to a certain tier. These can be rush built too, again, using thralls. This is why I'm saying that thralls are very, very important. And really, they are your hub. They are really, really strong. A pleasure palace is not just a standard major settlement. It is where you pick up all your major troops. It's where you get all your bonuses. It's where you get all your heroes. The buildings there, most of them will also cost thralls. So it's going to take a while before you start maxing them out. Again, don't you worry. It's going to be faster as time progresses, so don't feel like you're going to be stuck without any fun units throughout the majority of your campaign. And they'll give you some powerful bonuses, loads of money. Like I said, it just sucks that it's going to take a while for you to be able to pick up any heroes, barring the cultist, as they're tied to tier 3, and it basically is a few thousand thralls just to get there. What I would say is, if you can take advantage of situations like, for example, rebellion stacking and so on, if you just want to kind of like maximize how quickly that you go. Once you get to the pleasure palace to rank 3, well, then you can start building another one and another one and another one. It takes a while, but it's not really as slow, because you're not going to be wanting to build up too many pleasure palaces from the very beginning. I know that sounds weird. You want a central hub, and from that hub you expand. You'll start building more thrall camps, and then things will start upgrading much quicker. Once you get to a certain point that you get a lot of the buildings that you want, you'll be spawning up armies without any problem. If you build up the infrastructure buildings for the Tormentor Holds, they will benefit your pleasure palace to a ridiculous degree in terms of cash, so you're not going to have problems really supporting any of your massive amounts of hordes. Resource buildings are also an incentive for you because they will generate thralls for you, and that is incredibly important. The great thing is that there's a lot of resources in Cafe, so it's not going to take a lot of time for you to just get that, and then afterwards you can start ignoring a lot of thrall camps, and you can focus on all the other stuff. So it is really, really important to keep an eye out for those resources. I think you can see now why Creative Assembly have pushed for you to mostly use Marauders from the very beginning. There's so many bonuses for that, but it makes sense, and I kind of like it. It takes a while to kind of get used to, but after a few runs, I was like, okay, yeah, this is good. There's more stuff that we need to talk about. Like, for example, there is a cult. Yes, I know, not the most exciting thing, but the cult is great to be at the front there where you start. It's on a major settlement, and I really don't agree with that. I think it should be forward, but I see why Creative Assembly have done that. You see, you can't turn this settlement into a Pleasure Palace very early into your campaign, so you might as well have the cult there, turn that into a vassal, which usually you can do without too much of a problem. Have that feed you thralls from the cult and also as a vassal. And I'm saying that because that minor faction is also fighting against Balthazar Gelt, so he's going to take the areas on the other side of the canal, and then you're going to vassalize this faction and then start dealing with Balthazar. I mean, you could turn that into another thrall camp, but it's better just to have a vassal to support you, as the vassals will naturally provide you thrall generation, and you don't have to build up that settlement. Eventually, then you can just decide, okay, I'm going to kill them and take the settlement for myself, once you can start building up more pleasure palaces. That was so much settlement talk, let's do something else for a little second. So, yes, there is a small section of your tech tree which is only specific to you, as this has been going on for all the SLAANESH lords. I kind of like that. It's going to give you some thrall generation from the very beginning, which I generally kind of go for from the start, and then stuff with like all your other mechanics. There's a lot of bonuses, and I kind of like it. This needs to be done more with other lords. It's a small section of the tech tree. Norska got that too, but much smaller actually. But it really just does add a lot of flavor and uniqueness for certain characters. I think it's ultimately a really good way forward. And if you're asking, the giant spawn of SLAANESH in the tech tree is just, it's just a giant spawn of SLAANESH. It's a SLAANESH spawn, but like larger. That's it. All right, so there's more things that we do need to talk about, and we are going back into settlements because pleasure palaces aren't only for the sake of being your hub. A pleasure palace will also give you decadence. So as you upgrade your pleasure palace, you'll be getting more decadence, and this is only from the pleasure palaces and is spent on Tormentor's tributes. Another mechanic, because yes, DECHALA or DECHALA is incredibly stacked in terms of just how many mechanics she's got access to, which I find really, really curious. Because Decadence is used on Tormentor's tributes, and here's where you get a bunch of really cool things, because you get Marks of Vindictiveness, right? These grant you army abilities that can be equipped on the pre-battle screen, very similar to Ostankia's debuffs and buffs and stuff. Really, really good, actually. And you can upgrade them here to make them much more viable. This means that you can actually just keep making these really, really strong, hurt the enemy quite hard. There's opulent gifts too, which are items, right? You can use those items to buff up further lords and heroes. Again, all of this is going to cause decadence, so it's going to take a while. And then finally, there is exquisite spoils. The exquisite spoils will be spent to buff up your faction. Yeah, one-off faction bonuses. You're going to start snowballing more or less around oh, well, it does depend, really, because I've had multiple tries at this. If you're min-maxing, maybe around turn 50 or so, you can start seeing really big benefits. But if you're going through a normal campaign and just having some fun, 75 to 100, that kind of works there too. Sometimes it might be sooner. Again, I haven't tried to min-max a lot, mostly because I just really wanted to enjoy the character, and I think that's the better thing for me. But yeah, as you can see, this is why I mean that there's a lot of Chaos Dwarf inspiration here, which is really funny to see that attached to a SLAANESH character. That's the most attention that SLAANESH has gotten ever, I think, at this point. Not just in Total War, I mean like in general, right? Well, barring Age of Sigmar. You can beeline for these effects, but yeah, you know, they're quite expensive. It does take a while. In some cases, you'll probably want to go for the items first. They can be kind of expensive, but again, more pleasure palaces, more quicker bonuses. I think that's probably the best way of explaining it. So, let's talk a little bit about combat so we can have a little bit of a break from anything settlement related. So, seduction is gone, and here you have a new method where rather than taking the units, you'll be debuffing the enemy units. This can be a bit weird sometimes, right? Because obviously, yeah, you know, enemies can get a lot of bonuses depending on how far you use like the difficulty meter and so on. it can be a bit of a problem, and it does mean that Gelt is going to be very strong. Keep that in mind. Gelt is very, very strong. The debuffs are great and not too expensive too. You can only use that on enemy units. You can't use that on lords, and you can't use that on heroes, which would have been useful, I guess, but you never know for the future. The big thing here is, this is why I said, like, Gelt is a tough cookie to crack, right? You're going to want to come in with a good, strong force, and Marauders aren't really the best. So keep that in mind. It's going to be tough. You're going to want to take out Gelt quite quickly and potentially just vassalize him if you can, which you definitely can. And yeah, you can also get some extra bonuses there, because you do have boons of SLAANESH. These are available to all your armies. They're going to cost thralls, which again shows how expensive thralls are. But you can get Amber Success Chance, Stalk for Lord's Army, or maybe even just Wayfarer, Armor Piercing Damage. All that stuff is useful versus not only Gelt and his troops, but also the Cathayans, who many Cathayans, especially Zhao Ming, will have a lot of armor. Oh, here's a big important tip here. Avoid proliferating cults like the Plague. This costs thralls too, and really there is like no benefit towards the cults, barring like maybe the cult that starts off for free for you. Seriously, just avoid this. I've made the mistake. And Creative Assembly, please add like an "Are you sure" button for this, for all the monogods. And another big point to talk about here is, please, Creative Assembly, I'm making a plea like I do every single month. Mortal Lords need to have an upkeep reduction ability when it comes to the monogod factions, because with this faction, you're incentivized to use more mortals, right? But there is no upkeep reduction for them, which makes the armies quite expensive. It's the same thing like what happens with Tamacon, and it's the same thing that happens with Arbau. The Mortal Lords desperately need reduction. I don't want to be using Heralds or Keeper of Secrets, like I can, but the incentivization for the campaign has been around Mortals. This really needs to be done. It really desperately needs to be done, just for the benefit of campaigns like this. Tamacon the same, and really whoever comes in the future for Tzeentch, because I'm expecting some sort of Mortal Lord for Tzeentch at some point. Please, Creative Assembly, that too. And a little bit of wish listing here, but I think that they're very important, and it does help with the campaign. Not much has really changed for taking a full region, a province, barring the fact that you can get Announced Supremacy, which gives you +1 movement range to DECHALA. I know that doesn't sound good, but if you stack it up a lot, right, you can get quite a ridiculous amount of movement range, and I don't know if there's some sort of hard cap. I've not been able to find one myself. So yeah, you can get DECHALA basically jumping from settlement to settlement to settlement to settlement, which is ideal when you're trying to get thrall camps up. And some settlements are quite a distance away, especially when you start getting into like the whole Mountains of Morn situation. So pretty on, you'll get access to Stirka. He's the brand new legendary hero, a pretty interesting one at that, because yeah, you know, he's a mortal rider. He's going to be there to buff up more of your mortal troops. Right now we don't have mortal snake riders, but we don't know about that in the future, so I hope that his skill line does get updated. But yeah, that's a time in the future thing. So I don't like the start of his unlock chain, because you have to wound a character, so that's something that is always going to be a risk with your character potentially dying out. It's just kind of frustrating there. Where after that, you just have to kill 2,000 captives and you'll get access to Stirka, and that doesn't take too long, thankfully. He's a very fast character to get in that regard if you get lucky with RNG, because, I mean, you're going to be fighting everywhere, right? I've always felt it weird that legendary heroes start with their legendary items, because yeah, you don't feel them get stronger, they're just instantly strong, and it just feels like all the items are already baked into the stats. But he's pretty damn good, and yeah, he does have a pretty fun trait which makes him immune to flanking and increases the leadership for the old Marauders of SLAANESH, which is pretty good, alongside reducing the upkeep even further. So with DECHALA, for example, you can really make that army stupid cheap, or you can have him support another army, which is totally viable too. It very much depends on what you're doing in that campaign. Skill-wise, I mean, yeah, he's going to be buffing up Marauders. Interestingly enough, not the Hellstriders, which I think is a weird omission. You can make the Marauders super scary, but it would be nice if they could buff up the Hellstriders, as those are technically Marauders too, increasing their physical resistance quite dramatically. Also campaign movement range for your army. I am a very big fan of this character. I'm a very big fan of his model. I've got multiple copies of this model for my Old World army. it would just be nice for that. And then in the future, obviously, the Mortal Knights of Creative Assembly get down to being able to do that. But yeah, you can totally see why I meant, like, yeah, you're going to be focusing a lot on Marauders. Warrior armies and Chosen armies are still viable. Don't you worry about that. It's just you're elevating your Marauders. If you stack up both DECHALA and Stirka, you can basically make the Marauders fight like Chosen, which is hilarious. And it's nice to see, really. Alright, so we talked about pretty much all the details there for DECHALA. As you can see, it's very structured and there's quite a lot to do. I want to talk to you with my experience. I am extremely surprised that so much work went into DECHALA. I would say that it's even more structured than that of Tamukan's, considering all the types of buildings, all the types of mechanics. It's really, really curious to see what they got from basically very little amounts of lore that exists for this character. I'm very, very surprised presently at that. I've been playing this character for a decent amount of time and I can't wait. Well, now actually, as from today, I can stream her live, which is something that I've been dying to do. Because as you guys are aware, I'm a massive SLAANESH fan, so expectations were extremely high. Extremely high. So the fact that she's got so much to do with so many mechanics, and not only that, but it's got a mortal build. Again, if they fix up the issue with the Chaos Mortal Lords not having any upkeep reduction, I think that this would be a near perfect campaign. Like, really, up there with Tamukan and Malachi, Elspeth, and the rest. I am so incredibly impressed with the amount of work that's gone into this. I'm not too keen on the start position, I'll be very honest with you there. I don't feel like she should have been here, but placement for the campaign has been very strange throughout all the DLC, I think. And it's not that much of a problem, it's more than just, well, Gelt is a pain to deal with. But other than dealing with Gelt, it's pretty much smooth sailing. Might be just because I'm very used to this roster. I play a lot of SLAANESH in my own time. I'll play a decent amount of SLAANESH. I think it's important to point out that unlike Nurgle, for example, where a lot of the campaign loop and gameplay loop feels pretty much the same, barring Tamukan's unique mechanic, all three of the SLAANESH Legendary Lords have something different. And this is showcasing that this is entirely possible. If I want to play with a SLAANESH faction now, I have multiple campaigns. I have the Demon Prince, I have 3 versions of the Mono God, and then I have 2 Warriors of Chaos factions. I am very much spoiled for choice, which is great. And I'd definitely put her higher than the other 2 Mono God Lords compared to the Mask and Nekari. I like the Warriors of Chaos feel. I'm a big fan of the Warriors of Chaos. Hell, it's the army that I'm basically playing a lot right now in the Old World, barring Grand Cafe. So, yeah. Definitely a fun campaign to look out for. I will be streaming her live on twitch.tv/thegreatbookofgrudges if you want to check her out into more detail. Pop by, say hi, and before I let you go, I'll let you go with the narrative intro, so you can skip that if you want. There's not a lot of narrative in this DLC as far as I've been able to see, but, I mean, it's kind of expected, right? We got the big lore book, and that basically just fulfills the narrative for DECHALA anyway, which, yeah, it's not bad. The lore book was actually pretty decent. Have a good one, guys. I'll see you all again very, very soon. And yeah, I think we're almost done with everything. See ya! Anything.
Deep within the chaos wastes, a monolith of marble extols the beauty and the terror of DECHALA, the darkly radiant malice which none can withstand. Whatever and whomever she desires is hers to ruin and corrupt. Her whirling madness has driven her across the known world. Her serpentine form strikes fear into the hearts of the dragons themselves. And she shall be denied no longer.
in sweet surrender or bitter misery. I shall have them all.